Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set live is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Hugely terrific.
Good. I'm hugely terrific as well.
Is it because someone in Nyakajeme did this right political thing for you?
We'll get to that in a minute, but before we get there, let's welcome all our Facebook followers watching us from all over the world. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka himself and ask some serious questions about politics or any subject that you want to talk about today. But before we start, let's maybe start in Singapore. The U.S. President Donald Trump and his counterpart, the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, just concluded the historic meeting. Let's get your assessment so far.
Very, very historic indeed, because let's face it, the two principals came out actually showing that they had developed a chemistry. They had developed a chemistry to such an extent that I last watched President Trump talking about how Kim trusts him and he trusts him. So it looks like they're onto something, because let's face it, Paul, this is the first time that the leaders of these two respective countries have actually met since the early 1950s. There had not even been a telephone call between Washington and Pyongyang. This time, they finally met one-on-one, seem to have liked each other, and guess what? They obviously met in a country that not many decades ago was a developing third world country, the city-state of Singapore, built, of course, into a first world by Lee Kuan Yew, the great man.
How significant is this meeting? When you look at what has been going on over the years, the rhetoric between the two leaders, how significant?
I think it is very, very significant in terms of symbolism. Beyond the symbolism, I don't really know what you can say about it, because you pretty much have to be patient and wait to see actually what happens or doesn't happen. Because let's face it, the fact that they were able to meet and talk itself is symbolically huge.
I was reading and maybe trying to follow up on what was taking place in Singapore, and one of the I saw a couple critics saying that the agreement that they signed doesn't go so far. It doesn't put like there's no way they are going to implement this, because it's not specific. It doesn't touch certain things. A lot of people are looking for maybe nuclear disarmament or nuclear denuclearization of North Korea. That didn't happen. So perhaps it's something that we have to wait and see.
Of course, that's the only thing you have to do, because let's face it, I don't really know why a lot of people expected a lot of things out of this particular first meeting. I think people should always be very, really cautiously optimistic. They should be very, very patient, because let's face it, I think what you actually saw happen in Singapore could probably be characterized as essentially talking about talks that those two probably have yet to have.
A lot of people, including President Trump, credited the North Korean leader, saying that he's a gifted young man, he's got talent. The fact that he's able to be on the same stage with the U.S. president, the fact that he has put his foot on the ground, says something about that young leader.
There's no question about it, Paul. First of all, his parents made sure that he became the beneficiary of arguably one of the best educations. He spent a lot of time in Switzerland and had his formal education and what have you. He speaks many languages, which probably an American president probably wouldn't speak. Most American presidents pretty much speak English. They probably don't have to worry. After all, English has since become a world language. But let's face it, this is a man that not only is he young, in which case, of course, he also has an advantage in the sense that he is young. He probably interacts also very easily with the new social media and what have you, and knows what is happening not only in the neighborhood, in his own neighborhood, but beyond. Mind you, this comes about because perhaps he, unlike his father and his grandfather, who somehow viewed the world differently, this is a man who was recently in Seoul. We're talking about South Korea. And perhaps because of that meeting with the president of South Korea, eventually it leads to what? The big one.
Do you think this meeting, this symbolic meeting, is going to open up North Korea? Or that's something that we have to wait and see how this whole thing plays out?
I think it has the possibility of doing precisely that, because frankly, let's face it, even though North Korea is a very fiercely independent nation, it also happens to be part of the international community. It wants to be liked. It wants to have allies. It wants something to happen so that it can also, frankly, enjoy some economic advantages, because the economy is not in a particularly good shape. They can't simply live on nuclear weapons. I mean, you can't eat nuclear weapons. They obviously have demonstrated the fact that they are very advanced in some sciences and all that kind of stuff, that they can go places. Now it's time for North Korea to figure out a way of opening up so that their people really can begin enjoying life like people who live, for example, in their immediate neighborhood. Let's face it, you're talking about South Korea and North Korea. Guess if those two countries could unite, you could probably get a superpower.
Absolutely.
Right here, because let's face it, you remember before you had West Germany, and then you had East Germany and what have you. And guess what? When these two countries came together, you can see where Germany is. And what about Korea? I think that, both of them have some, something to offer each other. And if they can bring those two differences together, hey, you're looking at some giant superpower or another giant superpower actually coming out of Asia.
Well, that's a perfect segue to our next segment. Talking about superpowers, we are talking about Russia, but we are not talking about politics. We are talking about the upcoming World Cup.
Which is a sort of superpower in itself.
Absolutely,
a beautiful game.
There is a lot of excitement, whether it's here in America, but largely across Africa and the entire world. People are cautiously optimistic about the upcoming World Cup. Let's start with a comment from Frank Nwamanya in Uganda. The FIFA World Cup is kicking off in Russia this week. What is the significance on the continent and the world at large?
First of all, we're talking about, most people agree that it is the beautiful game. This is an event that essentially helps to unite the entire globe. No matter where you go, anywhere in this world, on this planet Earth, everybody is pretty much talking about nothing but the beautiful game. We're talking about football. So it actually becomes a sort of universal language, something that cuts across class, ethnicity, race, gender, something that cuts across nationalism, you name it. It is the only constant. It is a common denominator. The world essentially right now is going to be, in a sense, in some mode of celebration. Whether you win or you lose, it will be a celebration of sorts.
5 African countries are represented. We are talking about Nigeria, Senegal, Egypt, Tunisia, and Morocco.
Yes.
There is obviously a lot of excitement. If you're from West Africa or Northern Africa, yes, you have to be really, really into this kind of thing. Whether you are from those regions or not, I personally am not from those regions, but I feel the sentiment. I feel like I want to be there. But some of these teams, they have all odds stacked against them. How do you think they will fare?
First of all, I beg to differ with you a little bit that if you are from West Africa or from North Africa, you probably have something to celebrate about. But what about if you are from Africa? Because let's face it, these guys, in addition to representing their own countries, are actually representing you and me.
That's correct,
representing the entire African continent. That is why they are among the 5. Now, having said that, 3 of them don't look like are in good company.
Right.
We're talking about 3, Morocco, Nigeria, and Tunisia. They look like they are in what the stereotype would characterize as the group of death. Why do I say that? Egypt, in fact, will be the first African country to appear in the stadium, and comes against Uruguay. Uruguay, of course, a South American country that has, in fact, to his credit, has won World Cup twice, even though this was a very, very long time ago. But you remember, again, what it is largely known for. In the World Cup held in South Africa, remember?
Yes.
2010, what did it do to the Black Stars of Ghana?
Eliminated them.
You remember Suarez?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the guy. That is Uruguay that is going to meet with Egypt, and this is Friday, June 15th. And then, of course, the following day, you have another team, which is Nigeria. Nigeria this time also meets a very formidable team. We're talking about Croatia, one of the best teams actually in Europe.
Absolutely.
You know that? And then, of course, the same day, you do have Morocco, which is going to be meeting Iran. That probably would be a fair good game or balanced game for Morocco. And then you have Senegal, which is going to be meeting Poland. Poland sometimes can be a very tricky football team, and so that is going to be in Group H, and that will be Tuesday, June 19th. And then, of course, you have Tunisia. Tunisia is, of course, in the group of death. And we're talking about Tunisia meeting England. England, by the way, to tell you the truth, is always like an average football team. The only time it has won the whole enchilada is back in 1966. And that game was held in Wembley Stadium, by the way, in the English capital of London itself.
Well, Shaka, to be honest with you, I look forward to the opening matches this Thursday. Personally, I love the World Cup. I guess I'll be maybe trying to sneak in when I can to catch some of these games. I don't know how it works because we'll be at work sometimes at very late in the night, but we'll see how it goes.
Well, I have to tell you before you really move on that I feel so sad because before I came to the United States many years ago, I used to be a very keen football player and football observer. In fact, I used to be a football or a soccer sycophant. I could probably tell you about the entire first 11 of Brazil, of England, of West Germany at the time when they had Beckenbauer and all that kind of stuff. I could tell you about a lot of things about football, but since coming to America, where probably you begin, singing the virtues of basketball and American football and stuff like that, there isn't really much that I can tell you about. But I will support the African teams with my heart. And I say this from the deepest, better part of the bottom of my cavalry heart and soul. And if they are eliminated, I hope at least one of them for the first time makes history by advancing to the semi-finals. No African team has ever advanced beyond the quarterfinals. And if they're eliminated, then I will probably look at Brazil. I hope Brazil will have an opportunity to somehow sincerely figure out a way of removing the monkey off its back. I'm talking about the 7 goals that were scored against Brazil in Brazil itself by the Germans during the last World Cup. It was a humiliation, really.
Yeah. A reminder that you are watching Shaka Extra Time on Facebook Live. And in case you just are joining us today, we are even live on Twitter. So if you want to reach us via Twitter, you can use the hashtag Shaka Extra Time. Shaka, let's maybe move along. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about Congo, the DRC. There is so much happening in Congo. But more importantly, last week, the former Vice President Jean-Pierre Bemba was acquitted by the appeals court at the International Criminal Court. There's a lot of talk out there that if this guy is released today, if he goes back into Congo, he will become the next president. Your thoughts?
He could, of course, but I have to correct something here, Paul. You said the former vice president. You remember, he was not the only vice president. There were 4 vice presidents, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so he was one of the former vice presidents. This is a man who arguably, there are a lot of people who actually said he could in fact have legitimately won the election in 2006. And even later, 2006 he could have won, but that he was actually rigged because you know how elections are conducted on the continent. A lot of people call them, in fact, selections, not elections, because there is an African president who at one time said, and this was the former president of Senegal, that how can you, in fact, you are an incumbent president, organize and hold an election that you end up losing. And so this is a man who people suspect, he could have won that election. And the election which came up 2011, you know where he was. By that time, he was in fact in The Hague, in a prison, and still he commanded a lot of following, a lot of support. And as we talk, even though the man has been in the prison for more than 10 years, guess what? A recent public opinion poll in DRC suggested that if he were in fact running, he would end up 3rd. This is a man who has actually been in prison for at least 11 years. So this man, if he is released, and I'm sure he's going to be released anyway, because the only thing remaining is about a charge that he may have interfered with witnesses in terms of evidence and what have you and stuff like that. But
that's a lesser charge, though.
Yeah, but the maximum charge, in fact, maximum amount that he could actually be locked up happens to be 5 years.
And he has already served that.
More than 10 years. So I think I could only say that I can see him free tomorrow. And if he is free, he obviously will go to Belgium to join his family, which is right there. And eventually I think he will definitely go back to Kinshasa. And if he goes to Kinshasa, I would frankly want to agree with you that, guess what? He could actually be the next occupant of State House, Kinshasa. So he could be the guy that you and I would go back to Kinshasa actually to interview.
Let's go to a Facebook comment from Chinyeri Ezifi. What is the reason that a 3rd-term agenda is so popular among African leaders? Earlier, you and I were talking about in Ethiopia how the current, the new prime minister wants actually that lifted. He wants he wants terms put in place so that the current prime minister or his tenure is affected by those terms, to have a prime minister who is elected by terms. But on the other hand, in Ivory Coast, you have Alassane Ouattara, who is suggesting or implying that he wants to remove term limits. What's up with that?
It's very interesting. When we go to Ethiopia, you're looking at Abiy Ahmed, an incredibly politically generous player. Because let's face it, traditionally, there is absolutely no reason, if you are using what they call a parliamentary system, you do not need to have term limits, because you do not have an individual actually running nationally for that particular position. Because to be a prime minister, it is an appointment or an election that you get from a victorious political party which of course is allowed to form a government, or a coalition of political parties which form a government and have to choose among themselves someone that becomes a prime minister, the first among equals, because a prime minister in fact means a big minister, but a minister nonetheless. So he is a very progressive guy, because let's face it, you can see the kind of reforms he's coming up with. You can't believe this man only came in office in April. And right now, it pretty much looks like a sort of trajectory political change of sorts in Ethiopia, a country until recently that was so autocratic. Right now seems to be on the verge of, in fact, being, in a sense, a candidate for democracy in that region, frankly, where democracy seems to be a foreign language.
Before we leave Ethiopia, what are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow, in fact, we are talking about nothing but Ethiopia. We are actually looking at Abiy Ahmed. This is a man who has released a lot of prisoners, who some of them came from the opposition, and he even, in fact, went to a house of a family of an opposition leader who was until recently charged as a terrorist, paid a courtesy call on him and congratulated him for being free. This man was in Egypt the other day, and guess what? He was given some Ethiopians who had actually been imprisoned because of being illegal, and he flew to Addis Ababa with them in his own prime minister's plane.
Very interesting.
He's a very interesting guy. And then, of course, you can talk about a small place called Badme in northern Ethiopia, a territory that was decided by an international tribunal that it belongs to Eritrea. But for the last 18 years, my friend, Ethiopia has refused to deliver.
Yeah, it's been the epicenter of...
Precisely. And this is a very small place called Badme. Population about 15,000 human beings. My friend, this place killed a combined force of about 70,000 soldiers.
Wow.
50,000 from Ethiopia, 20,000 in Eritrea. This man now is saying, come on, man. This piece of land, territory, belongs to Eritrea, because Eritreans are brothers. Even though Eritrea has not, until we came to air, had not officially responded to that gesture. And then, of course, the guy has opened up the kind of political space. He's saying that the people who were regarded as terrorists, as political adversaries or enemies and what have you, are now political competitors. He's inviting all the exiles to come back to Ethiopia so they can help to develop their country. Incredible.
Let's cross over to Uganda. Let's go to Don Mokalazi. He says, hello, Shaka. I'm a Ugandan. I'm really feeling sad about our country because higher government officials are killed each and every time. What should we do as citizens to curb this because our government has failed us?
You know, I have to say to my brother that what he needs to do, along with his colleagues, they need to organize and mobilize. They need to figure out, to kind of like answer a call, because there is a saying that all of life is action and passion. And to ignore the action and the passion of your time or generation, my brother, is to risk having not really lived at all. The alternative is to occupy space. You're talking about 40 million Ugandans, really. The government we are talking about is headed by General Yoweri Museveni, retired, but certainly not tired. He has a huge army, security forces. I don't think they are beyond 1 million people. I don't think they are beyond even 500,000. And so if you can, in fact, take advantage of at least the document that is called a constitution, that is virtually almost reduced to being a personal manifesto for President Museveni, I think you can use that document because it pretends at least to allow Ugandans to have the freedom of expression, to have the freedom of assembly. In other words, it allows you to organize, to mobilize, so that you can assert your constitutional rights. You have to assert your citizenship, because right now, I have to say, Ugandans, frankly, they behave and they look like and they live like subjects.
But Shaka, let me push back on that. You can have a perfect constitution in place. You can have perfect whatever's safeguards in place, but they are not going to stop insecurity from coming up. You have all these murders, unexplained murders. Nobody has been able to catch any of these people committing crimes of that nature.
Unfortunately, I disagree, Paul, because the first responsibility of any government, first and foremost, is to provide security to its citizens, its people, and property. If you have reached a point as a government where you cannot in fact guarantee that inalienable right, then it means that you are no longer in a position to be called or to call yourself a government. Then you should go. You should resign, because you're not in control. You can only be a government if you are in effective control of a society, if you are in effective control of the elements that give you the opportunity to provide certain fundamental rights of human beings. You have to make sure that you do things that are expected of a state. Because the people pay their taxes. If the people pay their taxes, you have to use those taxes, for example, to pay your civil servants, to pay your public officials, to pay your soldiers, your intelligence operatives, your police officers, and what have you. So if you feel that you are not in a position to guarantee the basic fundamental rights of a people and security of their property and what have you, please, just step aside. Call for elections. Let someone else come and be in charge of the store.
Yeah, Shaka, very briefly, let's go to Cameroon. Let's go to Mustafa Mona. Similarly, the people of Cameroon are going through political unrest, and the Western media is silent and paying attention to the quagmire. God save Africa. Your thoughts?
God save Africa, but Africans are going to have to learn to save themselves. And in fact, they have already saved themselves in the past. If they hadn't saved themselves in the past, Cameroon, as it is right now, wouldn't be experiencing the second president of the Republic, Paul Biya. Because let's face it, it was under the French, initially under the Germans, because of the Berlin Conference of 1884-85. But the Africans, they somehow organized themselves, mobilized, organized, and fought against colonialism. Look, the British had an empire where the sun never set. Where are they? Apartheid South Africa even had nuclear weapons. Where are the Boers? Where are the Afrikaners? Where is the apartheid South Africa? It's gone. Some of these things can go to.
Yeah, very briefly, Shaka. We have a call of, a comment from Nigeria. And Nathan asks, why are you silent about Biafra?
I am not silent about Biafra. Biafra is a very long story, because let's face it, you have to go back to 1966 when you had a coup and a counter coup that eventually brought about Biafra. So it's something that we probably need to address in Straight Talk Africa.
Well, we have to go, unfortunately. Thank you so much for being a great guest. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Straight Talk Africa, of Shaka Extra Time. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.